In a secret and nearly forgotten war that brought Hitler's assault to American shores, a German submarine torpedoes a U.S. convoy just miles off the North Carolina coast. And disappears beneath the waves. Seven decades later, at the bottom of the Atlantic, the outline of a sleek Nazi killing machine emerges from the darkness. No one has laid eyes on her since she sank. It's a triumph of underwater archaeology, a glimpse into a pivotal moment of the Second World War.
Hi, copy, Nemo.
We got a visual.
And a horrific end to one of the darkest mysteries in naval history. "40 miles off the shores of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, the research vessel Baseline Explorer bustles with activity and nervous anticipation. The crew is deploying a pair of submersibles into what's known as the graveyard of the Atlantic. A dangerous stretch of coastal waters plagued by treacherous shoals, swift currents, and violent storms that has claimed more than 5,000 ships since record-keeping began in the early 1500s. Sub-pilot Robert Carmichael prepares to take maritime archaeologist Joe Hoyt down some 700 feet to a target hidden from human view for more than 70 years. Robert is one of the founders of Project Baseline, which aims to get divers from around the world to document the current state of their waters as a baseline for judging future changes to the oceans.
All right, swimmer says he's ready for a pickup. All right, Joe.
Request permission to open vents and dive.
That's affirmative.
Joe works in the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, which oversees the protection of historically vital shipwrecks. It's a 20-minute descent through tricky currents into near complete darkness, a descent Joe has dreamed of for years. It may hold the key to understanding the longest-running battle of the Second World War, a deadly game of cat and mouse that Adolf Hitler hoped would cripple America and her allies' war-making might. December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor. Hitler has long awaited this day of infamy and his own chance to attack America. Within weeks, his U-boats are sinking ships just miles off the U.S. coast.
The German government had anticipated the inevitable entry of the United States, and so very quickly were able to deploy a small force of U-boats into American waters. Those U-boats arrived in January of 1942 and began attacking merchant vessels primarily along the eastern seaboard, working their way down from New England into the coastal waters of North Carolina.
The idea in general was to cut off the supply chain of oil and other war materials that were flowing into Great Britain predominantly to fuel the European war effort. So oil that's coming out of the Gulf of Mexico is running up the east coast here, and then it's going over to Britain and is putting fuel in RAF planes that are doing bombing raids and tanks and things. And so if you could cut off that supply chain to an island nation, you could really limit the ability for the Allies to wage war.
Hitler's plan works brilliantly at first, sinking ships up and down the eastern seaboard. Somehow, the U.S. military manages to keep the Nazis' success a closely guarded secret. So much so that most Americans then, and to this day, don't know how chillingly close German subs got to their shores. The German High Command calls it Operation Drumbeat, but U-boat commanders refer to these months as the happy time, or the American shooting season. They sink more ships than were lost at Pearl Harbor. By the spring of 1942, though, the American military begins to respond. Merchant ships are organized into convoys, protected by patrol ships and aircraft. The first U-boats are sunk, and by early summer, the battle for control of U.S. waters is reaching a fever pitch. July 15th, 1942. On a blustery afternoon, a convoy of merchant ships heads from Virginia to Key West, Florida, and navigates slowly around Cape Hatteras. They are being stalked by German U-boat U-576. U-576, under the command of 29-year-old Hans-Dieter Heinecke, and with a crew of 44, has been haunting these waters since it left Nazi-occupied France just a month ago. Heinecke and his crew had already sunk 3 ships during 2 previous patrols along the U.S. coastline, including the British merchant vessel Empire Spring, which lost all 53 crew members off Sable Island. On the afternoon of July 15th, they were actually planning to return home to France after reporting irreparable damage to U-576's main ballast tank. But as they made their way off the coast of the Carolinas, they stumbled into American convoy KS-520 and made the fateful decision to engage.
It was basically a textbook attack. The way that they lined up on the convoy was 19 ships moving south out of Norfolk. There were 5 escort vessels, Navy and Coast Guard ships, as well as aircraft coverage. So as they're moving southward, the 576 is to the southeast of them, and it fired a full bow salvo, 4 torpedoes, into the convoy. All 4 torpedoes struck their targets. The J.A. Mowinkle, the Chilori, and the Bluefields were all struck.
The Mowinkle and the Chilori are severely damaged, and the Nicaraguan freighter Bluefields begins taking on water. It looks like a devastating victory for the U-576. But then the U-boat does something completely unexpected. It pops to the surface, smack in the middle of the convoy.
Now, what we think happened is that some of that damage to their ballast system may have not allowed them to adequately compensate for the sudden loss of weight of those torpedoes, and it caused the U-boat to bob to the surface in the center of the convoy, which is exactly what they don't want to do.
Many of these merchant vessels, despite being merchant ships, had armaments on them, and they had Navy crews assigned to them to man the guns. So one of those ships then began firing its deck gun at the submarine at the same time that the aircraft that were patrolling above dive-bombed it and dropped aerial depth charges. The combination of that then forced the submarine back under, and it was never seen again.
The Bluefields also slips beneath the waves within minutes, and the final resting place becomes another mystery of the graveyard of the Atlantic. NOAA has been conducting an extensive search for World War II wrecks off the North Carolina coast since 2008. But the U-576 and Bluefields remain elusive. With the help of a battle reconstruction by John Bright, they narrowed the search area. A blip on a sonar survey led to progressively more detailed images, until in 2014, when an autonomous underwater vehicle produced this image of what was believed to be the U-576 using a sophisticated high-resolution sonar. But still it lay beyond the reach of human eyes, until now. Robert and Joe have finally reached the seafloor. The currents have swept them far from the wreck,
Nomad, topside.
but with help from topside, Robert maneuvers them back to the site.
Bearing 320 degrees for 700 feet.
We are currently at 769 feet.
They scan for confirmation. Could this be the sub that Joe has been searching for?
It's pitch dark down there, and the visibility's not very good either. We knew we were within 100 meters. Our surface tracking officer was guiding us, and we knew we were very close.
And then Joe's dream materializes. The unmistakable shape of U-576 looms out of the darkness like the marine predator it once was.
As you go deeper through the water column, it gets darker and darker and darker. But as your eyes adjust, there's a little bit of light down there, and you can start to sort of see through the water a little further. And eventually we just came across this massive, perfectly preserved U-boat.
Congratulations, Rob. Proud to be here with you, man. Look at that. Topside. We got a visual.
Looks like it probably looked the day it sank. It's just sitting there.
What's that?
U-576.
Getting down there with Joe Hoyt, being the first two humans to witness the U-576 laying on the bottom, it was surreal. Very proud moment. To watch Joe articulate as I showed him around that sub.
The elation ripples 700 feet up to the mothership, where Surface Officer Shane Ziegler keeps an eagle eye on the submersible's position and life support systems.
Exciting moment having Joe down there with Robert in the sub and laying human eyes on something that they've worked so hard over the years to find. Something that hasn't been seen since it sunk, since the airplanes dropped the bombs on it.
So we zip around the back, we should be able to see both rudders and the diving planes there.
And that's not all. The hunter has come to rest unbelievably close to the hunted. And Robert takes Joe over for a look at the blue fields.
The blue fields, that's one of the most incredible things about this site is, you come across this U-boat sitting on the seabed, and we're encircling it, checking it out, taking imagery, and then say, all right, hang a right, and 250 meters away is another shipwreck that it sunk. It was unbelievable to be able to go between the two on a single dive and see both sites.
But while the U-576 appears pristine, the wreck of the blue fields is a tangled mess, its mortal wound obvious.
Look, it's split all the way down.
Yeah.
Well, the final torpedo hit Little Bluefields. When it hit, the damage must have been devastating. What we've seen of it on the bottom is almost a complete break about amidships, and the torpedo came into the port side of the vessel.
The irony is that not a single man was lost on the Bluefields, the prey in this battle. But what Joe discovers on the U-576 provides new evidence of the fate of the 45 men on board and the horrific deaths they likely endured.
The area that has the most prominent features is the sail, the conning tower, amidships. That is completely intact with the outer hull fairing, the winter garden still there with a 20mm flat gun still on deck. And then there in the center of the deck is the hatch still dogged down, holding 45 men inside.
Further examination reveals the U-576 sustained very little damage and may have remained completely intact as she came to rest on the ocean floor.
The hatches were closed, the torpedo doors were closed, all of the hydroplanes, the fins that controlled the movement of the submarine up and down in the water were up. By all accounts, it looked like the submarine was trying to return to the surface. I mean, it doesn't seem like anybody was able to open anything up and get out. It's totally sealed up there, resting in 725 feet of water.
studied this history for so long, and you know, it kind of becomes this narrative in your mind where all the actors within it sort of take on almost like a fictional quality as you sort of read these stories and interact with this history. And then the moment that it kind of came out of the darkness and was suddenly there right in front of us, it just made that whole thing seem so much more real, and it's just incredible.
Now the work of virtually raising both predator and prey from the seabed begins. Physically raising them for archaeologists and historians to study is impossible, so the submersibles will descend several times a day to scan both wrecks with precision lasers and take high-resolution photographs. These will be combined to create breathtakingly detailed models for scholars to study in cyberspace or with 3D printing. With news of a hurricane bearing down on the Outer Banks, every pass counts.
Laser line scaling is, for a pilot, is pretty challenging, because one of the biggest things in dark water is I actually have to turn out my normal guidance lights, and I have to look down through the floor of the submarine and look at the blue laser as it wraps across the subject matter underneath me. And it's this beautiful purple-blue streak that just cuts a wide swath.
Laser scanning technology that we're working with through 2G Robotics is incredible. It allows us to have sub-millimeter accuracy of these features that is just really unprecedented for the work that we're doing on these sites. You know, we'd be able to resolve my ring or my watch. It's that detailed.
Now we can really get into the research. We can really get into studying the details of the submarine, studying the details of the blue fields, and really starting to address some of those unanswered questions that would never really be able to answer with the historical record alone. It takes seeing the archaeological remains of the vessel to finally put the details and the last of those puzzle pieces together.
The sinking of U-576 marked the turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic. Now that the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard knew how to protect convoys and sink U-boats, the Germans withdrew to resume attacks in the North and East Atlantic. Now that the final resting place of U-576 and Bluefields is no longer a mystery, NOAA hopes to extend National Marine Sanctuary protection to the site. For those who have seen the ships, Hunter and hunted both, it is the so-called Nazi killers who haunt them. All of them still trapped in U-576, and no way of knowing how long it took for them to die.
Seeing those hatches dog down, it's definitely jarring. It was very surreal. I mean, we have a couple of these old black and white photographs of the crew, and there's a photograph of them in the conning tower, you know, with binoculars looking out, and then you see all these features that you've only seen in this little grainy photograph, and suddenly there they are, kind of snapping through time, and it's just, you become immediately aware of the human component of it. Even though they were our enemies, there's still men inside there that you know, died for their country.
I would like to hope that the generations that are coming after my generation, who probably didn't have a direct connection to the war stories of our grandparents, that this story get retold, and the fact that, you know, there were human beings that were killing one another for some reason. And, you know, if we can move beyond that and you know, get people to focus on why were there 45 sailors in this submarine trying to blow up cargo ships? Is that really something we need to do again in our lives, our children's lives? I'd like that story to get told, and maybe people can think through, you know, whether they want to get along or not.
Both U-576 and Bluefields are war grave sites, considered hallowed ground. U-576 still belongs to Germany, But NOAA has pledged to protect it and all who lost their lives on that fateful day in July 1942.